Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Politics Relaxed. This week, we're going to be talking again about the SNP, this time their financial situation, as well as, of course, the leadership race, which has now concluded with Humza Yousaf becoming the new leader. We're going to discuss all of that today. Yeah, let's get straight into it. Does anybody want to start on the whole debacle?
I, I think I'll say as the resident Scottish correspondent, I guess that up here, I guess the tide is very much turned against the SNP. You've seen, I guess, from the point of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, it's all kind of unfurled. And I think even in the leadership contest you just mentioned, her legacy, and I guess the legacy of this guy Peter Murrell, kind of hung over it like a dark rainy cloud, I suppose. And even when it was kind of mired in cover-ups, if you're talking about membership figures, for example. And I think because if you want to talk about dominant political parties, I think the SNP have been one of the most dominant in probably the century as a whole, and it's quite interesting to see how that's all kind of spiraled out of control, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even
They had a
more.
selection of
Yeah.
they had a selection of three weak candidates, I'd argue, for leadership, and they picked they picked one of the weaker ones, I think, as a whole. I don't see any enthusiasm for Humza Yousaf at all from even from SNP supporters. I mean, the party seems so much more divided than it's ever been in the past.
That's because imagine it like the Hoover Dam, and you've got the Hoover Dam and the river behind it, and the dam itself is Nicola Sturgeon, and everything behind that is all these crazy people who are only grouped together because they want Scottish independence. None of them agree on what kind of Scottish independence they want. None of them agree on whether the SNP is a socially progressive or socially conservative party. Kate Forbes, she was the second in running for this. They can't agree on anything apart from the fact that they want an independent Scotland, and that will be their downfall without Nicola Sturgeon.
It's a downfall of many nationalist movements, especially
Exactly.
these days.
Exactly.
I think nationalism, I guess, in the era of Brexit failures and kind of this insular thing we're talking about with COVID is dying as a whole. I mean, if
Exactly.
you look at the leadership contest result, I think it was at like 52-48 in favor of Humza Yousaf.
Yes.
I can't think of where we've seen those numbers before
Twice.
in relation to Brexit. So I think if you want that to sum up how, I guess, polarized the SNP is right now, and it's incredible because we talked about before how they were this such a cohesive unit before,
Mm.
and I think because of that point, Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, everything's just gone to absolute. It's a
Yeah.
palaver.
I think Mirage is right, right? I think a lot of people forgot how much of a big tent the SNP was, and because of Nicola Sturgeon, everybody just thought, well, it's a progressive party that's to the left of the Labour Party and wants Scottish independence. But that's not necessarily true, as you can see with some of the faces that popped up during the leadership race. And I mean, again, Humza Yousaf is never seen as somebody who's particularly popular.
So that I think what unites these big figures such as Trump, Johnson, Sturgeon, if you will, is that they do possess immense amounts of charisma
Hmm.
and are able to kind of have a vice-like grip over their party. And I think in the wake of their departure, parties will eventually crumble. And this is something that we've seen happen time and time again. I think the Conservative Party right now have been engaged in a little bit of factionalism because of Boris Johnson's departure. I mean, even Labour at the start and probably still now, don't really have a united identity because of the legacy of Jeremy Corbyn
Yeah.
and the appointment of Keir Starmer. So I think it was expected that the SNP would unravel because Nicola Sturgeon was such a focal point and was such a dominant figure. It's just whether they are able to kind of sink or swim at this point.
Yeah,
I think this whole downfall, that's a bit harsh, but this whole decline, I guess, is just shows the importance of long-term leadership for political parties, which every party in the UK has struggled with in the last, I guess, since Blair, to be honest. I mean, Labour and Conservatives and Lib Dems have struggled to keep leaders for more than 3 or 4 years, and that has, the effects of that have been shown on each of their parties in turn, with them all having their low periods with that, and now this is happening to the SNP.
And my point more was that Humza Yousaf isn't a particularly strong candidate. I don't find, and I mean, from what I can get the sense of, he's not particularly competent when it comes to getting the job done. And that's such a
Yeah,
comparison to Nicola Sturgeon, who was a competent politician, who was a strong politician, and Humza Yousaf doesn't seem to have the same shine, if you will, that Nicola Sturgeon had, the same kind of strength and leadership that Nicola Sturgeon had. I don't get that sense from Humza Yousaf. I mean, I think we should give him a bit of time and see what he's like, but that's just the sense I get.
yeah, I completely agree with that. I think his record was health secretary and justice secretary among other positions, and I think particularly as health secretary, he oversaw, I think, a massive decline in standards in the NHS, specifically in Scotland. If you want to talk about drug deaths, for example, and quality of waiting times, for example, has gotten worse. I think his position as the continuity candidate got him into the office, but I think that I brought up the point of the 52-48. That's probably what I think defines this polarization as a whole, because while Kate Forbes, to many outside of Scotland and the SNP, was seen as the better alternative, it was likely that she was going to fall down quite convincingly, but it was much more closer than people thought, and that's kind of exciting.
And just moving it on a little bit, I mean, you talk about the closeness of the leadership race, and I mean, will Kate Forbes now have some issue with what's coming to light with Nicola Sturgeon and also the membership stuff that's now coming out? It means that that leadership race could be put into question. I mean, it was a very short leadership race compared to the last one, just 1 month compared to 3 months. So I think certainly the people that voted for Kate Forbes and Kate Forbes may have some questions now with the news coming out.
Well, she rejected I think, rejected a cabinet position, which make of that what you will. But I think throughout the leadership contest, she was wanting to distance herself, and if she's such an influential figure, I guess amongst the Scottish population as a whole, then that could really be damaging for the SNP.
I mean, I don't think it's unjust to suggest that as of April 2023, the SNP find themselves in the same place that the Conservatives have found themselves in for quite a while now. They've had their day, they've had their turn in government. They need to get out, get into opposition, and figure out what they actually stand for, because it's not clear anymore. They've been in power for too long. They're confused.
Well, I think people were saying this at 2019, 2020, and 2021, and they kept winning elections. That's what Nicola Sturgeon was best at. And we need to kind of, well, because I'm Scottish, I think we need to kind of look at the electorate as a whole and ask why did they keep voting for the SNP in? I mean, if you look at independence, the poll number, opinion polls about independence, it's not particularly high enough to suggest that the SNP would have such a big majority. So I think it's right to say that Nicola Sturgeon gone as leader will probably see a massive decline. Whether Labour or the Conservatives will be able to make significant ground on that, I don't really know at this stage, because you can't really tell anything at the moment in politics. But yeah, I think it's one to certainly watch, as Scotland is such an important country for the union.
Yes.
I think it'll be interesting to see what policy platform they set out for the next election, because I think that will define a lot of how the electorate see them. If they're promising new ideas, or if they're saying, "Well, look at our record in government," I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that affects polling as well. Because obviously, right now we've got a new leader. We're not 100% sure what that's going to mean. I mean, we assume that it's going to be a continuity from what Sturgeon did, but I mean, how they present themselves in the next election, I think will be really interesting to see.
I'll also be interested to see whether Humza Yousaf as a leader is more cooperative with Westminster, not in the way of trying to be more unionist, not at all, more in the way of not pushing the limits of devolution to the absolute max. Because that was the issue that Nicola Sturgeon's government ran into, especially with the trans recognition bill. It was perfectly fine legislation, but was outside the bounds of devolution itself. So I'll be interested to see whether he sticks to the rules more.
I
Maybe
think he
he'll be
said
less complacent.
he said he would drop the legislation, I think, or would certainly
Okay.
scale back from it. Um, but I think in comparison to Kate Forbes or someone, his, I guess, views on, say, trans rights and gay marriage, I think he abstained from the what was it, the vote on civil partnerships back in 2015. So I think he got a kind of lighter sentence than Kate Forbes. But if you're a party that stands for separation, then you need to be kind of this strong negotiator to not look as if this like radical, this kind of extremist party, because you won't get listened to. But the SNP have gotten themselves to a point where they can't be listened to, I guess. But independence is kind of coming down at the minute. So I mean, don't know with that.
Well, yes, I think that's partly because the Scottish people who may have voted for the SNP in the past have now seen the cast of characters who might be in an independent Scottish government. But that's neither here nor there.
Well, I mean, independence has been up there for a while now. I mean, it's this narrative that I think we got back in when Nicola Sturgeon resigned, that she suddenly felt tired. I think she probably resigned as in anticipation of this news breaking to maybe cover her skin. And I think
Yeah.
more people recognize that, because I don't know what you guys were feeling when she resigned, but the feeling in the media was that she was this, graceful and un, like not full of blemishes at all, but maybe questions will be asked of this. I don't know.
If I was in the SNP right now, I'd be pretty concerned with what's going on in terms of the financial situation. I mean, the auditors have just come out, like, not even at the end of the fiscal year, which is pretty much unheard of. So it means something seriously has gone pretty wrong. And I think Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, there's certainly questions about whether she knew or she didn't know before before she resigned, but I think there's going to be some serious questions asked, and I think her legacy as a leader will certainly be affected by what happens with her husband.
Well,
Yeah,
I think the
I
track
think
record
the
of the
money
SNP will
issue
too.
I think the money issue may well develop into something bigger in the coming weeks. I I mean, I may even say that it could even like be like, the main reason for Sturgeon's resigning, if it comes out that she had some involvement or something, because her reason for resigning was very vague in the first place, I'd say. And especially when she seemed in a relatively strong position, I'd argue, with having, with sustained calls for a second independence referendum. It was very much out of the blue. So if this money thing blows up, I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, my fear now is if the SNP's reputation is massively tarnished by whatever these auditors find, which it probably will be, is that those who may have supported the SNP in the past and still want to support independence will go to the Alba Party, where personally I feel like Kate Forbes fits in a bit more than the SNP. That's a fear of mine, and it could happen.
Thank you to you for watching. Thank you very much to you guys for coming on. As always, like the video, subscribe. There'll be more coming soon. Cheers.